the legendary warrior King Shaka of the Zulus transformed a small and insignificant tribe into one of the largest empires in Africa, smashing his rivals and incorporating the lands and people within his ever-expanding borders as his formidable armies carved a bloody path across southern Africa. However, the feared, respected, and loved man, whose meteoric rise had for so long seemed unstoppable, would ultimately be betrayed and butchered by his own brothers, his lifeless corpse unceremoniously discarded into an unmarked grave. Yet how could the strategic mastermind, who became known as Africa's Napoleon, fall so far so quickly? This remarkable man who would rise to wield almost godlike power came from the humblest of beginnings indeed. Born the son of a minor chieftain, what could have been a comfortable childhood of privilege and plenty would instead be transformed into a nightmarish curse of rejection and shame. Shaka's very existence considered a sin by his tribe due to being born out of wedlock. Caving to pressure from the tribe, at just 6 years of age, Shaka and his mother were exiled by his father, driven out into the harsh wilderness to fend for themselves. However, despite being taken in by a local chief by the name of Dingi Swayo, the disgraced mother and son suffered at the hands of their adopted tribe. The mother despised and shunned, Shaka teased and tormented by the other boys. Forced to endure years of harassment and neglect, his only refuge his mother, the two developing a uniquely powerful bond due to the shared torment and trauma. Despite this, Shaka refused to be broken, finding comfort from the harsh reality he inhabited by training for war, developing martial skills that Chief Dingi Swayo quickly recognized, enlisting Shaka into his army, where he served with distinction, displaying a natural aptitude for military strategy coupled with chilling ruthlessness, a cold-blooded personality most likely forged by his suffering as a child. When Shaka's father died in 1816, Chief Dingi Swayo offered his support, helping Shaka assassinate his older brother, who had already assumed the role of chief, and seize control of the Zulu clan, serving as Dingi Swayo's vassal in return. Using his already ample military experience, Shaka wasted no time in transforming the minor Zulus into a force to be reckoned with, force that would obey his command alone. Initially numbering fewer than 1,500, the Zulus were one of the smallest of some 800 clans in the region. However, under Shaka's stern and competent leadership, they would quickly grow into southern Africa's preeminent power. One of the keys to Shaka's stunning success was his total reorganization of the Zulu way of life as he set about building a society that thrived on constant, unending war and bloodshed. Traditionally, battles in the region had been relatively bloodless affairs and focused on driving the enemy from the field rather than outright slaughtering them, where the side with smaller numbers would usually be intimidated into yielding before any significant casualties were inflicted. However, under Shaka, the combat focus shifted from intimidation to outright extermination of the enemy. The Zulu abandoned the traditional throwing spear in favor of a short-handled, stabbing weapon with a long blade that forced his men to engage the enemy at close quarters, batting the enemy's shield aside with their own oxhide shields before plunging their blades into the now vulnerable foe's chest. Regiments or impis were organized by age group, the men quartered in separate villages and forbidden to take wives until they had proven themselves in battle, motivating them to fight with all they had, lest they remain alone and childless. Soldiers were forced to go barefoot at all times to toughen their feet and thus make them swifter in combat, while the boys deemed too young to fight took on the burden of carrying the older warriors' supplies, allowing the impis to march at a far greater pace than their enemies. An impi could cover an astonishing 50 miles per day, replenishing their supplies by taking what they need from any villages unfortunate enough to be in their path. In battle, the standard tactic was to divide the army into 4 groups. The strongest warriors were placed in what was known as the chest, moving forward to pin the enemy down, while 2 other groups known as the horns dashed around the flanks to encircle the enemy army and attack from the rear. The 4th group was known as the loins, a reserve that could be sent to reinforce any part of the encirclement if the enemy was close to breaking free. the entire maneuver overseen by officers using hand signals to direct their men into the right place at the right time. The glue that held this new war-centered society together was Shaka himself and the iron discipline he imposed upon every Zulu. The slightest opposition or disobedience was punished with instant death, King Shaka willing to wipe out entire villages of his own people to send a message to those who might consider betraying him. Soldiers who hesitated in combat or received wounds to their back were swiftly executed after the battle, while any regiment which suffered defeat of any kind would return home to find their wives and children beaten to death before meeting the same fate. Such merciless enforcement of discipline meant that Shaka's armies never ran away from a fight and were rarely defeated, preferring to stand and fight to the end than go home and face their king's wrath. In fact, even the Zulu capital city was called Bulawayo, meaning the place where they are killed, a name which clearly sets the tone of Shaka's leadership style. When his overlord Chief Dingiswayo was assassinated, the last obstacle in Shaka's path was removed. After incorporating Dingiswayo's tribe into the Zulu, his relentless impis scoured the land of all opposition, smashing the ancient network of clans that had settled southern Africa, assimilating all surviving enemy warriors into his own armies. As each clan fell, King Shaka grew ever stronger, the ranks of his armies swelled by the subjugated remains of his previous foes. War against the Zulu meant either victory or annihilation. There could be no compromise or ceasefire. Shaka would be the undisputed king or nothing at all. Yet such rapid expansion would inflict an immense human cost. Within a matter of years, Shaka had amassed an army of over 50,000 warriors and wiped out all significant opposition, leaving large areas of southern Africa a depopulated wasteland as the terrified survivors of his conquests fled inland. Known as the Crushing, this tidal wave of refugees would unleash more death and destruction than any of Shaka's armies, as the defeated remnants of the Zulu's enemies turned on other weaker tribes in a desperate effort to carve out a new homeland, causing a deadly chain reaction of minor wars as uprooted tribes attacked and displaced their own neighbours, who in turn inflicted the same fate upon their own neighbours. This deadly cycle of violence and upheaval utterly devastated southern Africa, leaving as many as 2 million dead from war, disease and famine, yet the suffering of the defeated was of little concern to King Shaka. By 1827, Shaka was at the height of his power, the godlike king able to field 50,000 fanatically loyal warriors to protect and expand the empire of 200,000 square miles containing over 250,000 people that now lay under his sole control. He seemed unstoppable, however all things must come to an end. All men, no matter how mighty, are eventually undone. Although Shaka's tyrannical behaviour and brutal, ruthless treatment of his own subjects had made him many bitter enemies, none had the courage to act against the invincible king. However, everything changed in 1827 when Shaka's mother suddenly died. The passing of the woman whom had been the only constant throughout his life seemed to shatter the king's mind, and overcome by grief, Shaka seemed to lose all grip on reality and reason. Driven mad by the loss of the woman who had provided him comfort during those difficult childhood years as an outcast, Shaka turned on his own people, unleashing a bizarre and insane forced period of mourning that threatened to destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. Anyone deemed to not be displaying a sufficient level of public grief was put to death, and it's estimated that some 7,000 Zulu were massacred by the vengeful and unhinged Shaka, as a psychotic atmosphere descended upon the land, where people were forced to mourn a woman they had never even seen for fear of the consequences from her deranged son. Those who had mistreated his mother in years gone by were hunted down and slain in a fit of rage, and Shaka began to see enemies and traitors hiding in every shadow, as a wave of indiscriminate killings washed over the land. The broken king demanded that for an entire year, no crops could be planted and no milk could be used, essentially outlawing the production of the two main sources of food consumed by his people, a decree which would create a famine that would kill large swathes of the population. Pregnancy was outlawed during the grieving year, and any woman who conceived was immediately put to death along with her husband, with even pregnant cows slaughtered so that the calf would know the feeling of losing a mother. Even his precious army would not be spared from the madness, the strength of his once proud impis wasted on pointless, lengthy military patrols that left his soldiers exhausted and mutinous. However, with the bulk of his armies sent to the far corners of the empire, for the first time in years, Shaka was left exposed and vulnerable. The madness unleashed by Shaka's grief was simply too much for the Zulu people to bear, and with their king in the process of destroying his own empire, those who had once feared and loved Shaka now turned against him, realizing that he had to be eliminated before his grief-born insanity reduced his people to ruin. With security lax at Shaka's royal quarters, two of his brothers approached, feigning a desire to offer their king tribute. However, they had already resolved to end their brother's life or die in the attempt. Accounts of what happened next vary, but it seems as though some kind of diversion was created, drawing Shaka's attention away from his brothers and providing them with the perfect opportunity to attack. Knowing full well that failure would mean their own painful deaths, along with the slaughter of their wives and children, the two men drew their blades and moved towards the man who had for so long utterly dominated the Zulu people, their hearts filled with terror and doubt. Could such a superhuman figure really be mortal? Undeterred and with a grim resolve, they plunged their blades into their brother's exposed flesh again and again, Shaka collapsing to the blood-soaked ground as a flurry of blows rained down upon him. The king was finally dead, the veil of madness that had settled upon the empire finally lifted. The corpse of the once great Zulu leader was unceremoniously dumped into an empty grain pit by his killers, his grave left unmarked and filled in with simple rocks and mud. With Shaka gone, his half-brother and assassin Dingani took control, ruthlessly purging any remaining Shaka loyalists who might have rallied together and taken revenge for the fallen king, his power secured by yet more murder and blood. Shaka's downfall was complete. The insane and bizarre fall from grace he experienced following his mother's death, demonstrating that all men, no matter how mighty and unstoppable they might seem at their zenith, can be undone. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you again soon.